so you all know you are being recorded. So all that being said, let's jump in and talk about some common problems and how to deal with them in English. So let's jump in. So first thing I would like to discuss is and address is your English level and how to optimize your English for the purposes of the meeting. And we already discussed some things that can be helpful last class. And the first thing was to prepare ahead of time. So I can't stress this enough. If you can, if you have the opportunity, if you know the agenda for the meeting, prepare ahead of time. This will allow you to think about what you want to say, to think of any words that you need to use that you might find difficult to reach for. And also another thing is, if you want to pose any questions during the meeting, this is also a good time to think about what questions you want to ask. Then if possible, it's sometimes good to let others know your English level before the meeting starts. And I know that this is not always a possibility, and you can't always do it, but when other people know that there will be an English learner in the meeting, so by English learner, I mean someone whose first language isn't English, they are usually more accommodating, or they have a bit of more of a sympathetic attitude towards the people in the meeting who don't have English as their first language. Don't worry too much about grammatical mistakes when you're in a meeting or when you're talking. It's better to speak fluently and coherently with a lively voice, so try to be animated rather than be focused on not making any mistakes and saying perfectly structured sentences, which sometimes, if you're having to think too much in order to do this, you will speak maybe slowly and in a monotone, and that comes with a lot bigger problems. So the only thing that I would say be mindful of when you are in a meeting is verb tense. That is the main grammatical aspect that you should try to avoid mistakes. Like if you're talking about the past, make sure you're using a past verb. If you're talking about the future, make sure you're using future forms. But other than that, once you're talking, don't worry too much about grammar. Don't worry too much about saying exactly the right thing, because a lot of the times you will be able to convey your message regardless. Don't be afraid to interrupt others and participate actively in meetings. So even if you're not very confident about your English, but you do have something to say, it's good to speak up. And we're gonna be looking at what you can say when you want to interrupt someone. Then try to improve your intonation or show enthusiasm or disapproval using your tone of voice, not only your words. So if I say, for example, that's great, you won't interpret me as being happy, rather than if I say, oh, that's great. So don't be afraid to use your intonation. If you have been in meetings or in conversations with native speakers of English, especially ones from the United States, you will see they are very animated when they talk. They use their intonation a lot to convey meaning and to show excitement or disapproval, or when they don't like something. So don't be afraid to do this yourself. I know at the beginning it may feel like you're acting a little bit and it might feel uncomfortable, but it is good to get into the habit of trying to imitate that intonation that native speakers have. And finally, use correct pronunciation when using words related to your job. So this is an area that I think is very important, because even if, your English isn't great, or you don't have perfect grammar, you want to have good pronunciation of those words that are specific to what you do. So for example, instead of saying LinkedIn, say LinkedIn if you're talking about the social media. Or instead of saying, for example, C sharp, say C sharp. So be mindful of these things because these are key words in your area of expertise. These are words that sometimes it can be confusing if you don't pronounce them correctly. So try to make sure and maybe even practice in your free time these little words that are key to what you're saying and that are very important for people to understand you, because you don't want any confusion as to your subject area. So getting into the first item that I talked about at the beginning, time management. So how to manage time during a meeting. So the first thing is we're going to look at how to manage questions. So oftentimes people will have questions during a meeting and you don't always want people to ask those questions at the beginning or when they come up. So if you want to let people know when to ask their questions, you can say something like, in order to get through our agenda successfully, we'll save time at the end to address any questions you might have. If you have any questions outside of the agenda today, please save those until the end. If you have any questions during our discussion today, the easiest way to know is with the raised hand reaction. So this is a good one to use if you're having a meeting with a lot of participants that is over Teams or Zoom or whatever software you're using for the meeting. So it's always good to let people know when they can ask questions. And next, you want to make sure that you keep to time. Everyone is usually very busy. A lot of times people have back-to-back meetings or they don't have a lot of time to spare. So you want to keep people aware of when time is running out or conversations need to be wrapped up. So um, something that you can say if things are taking too long is, can we keep to time? I have another meeting after this one. So this is if, you're worried that you won't finish the meeting on time. Time's moving on. Can we go on to the next item? We're almost out of time. Can I ask everyone to be brief? We're running out of time, so we need to move on to the next point. Perhaps we need to discuss that topic in a separate meeting. Time is pressing, so let's make a decision. And finally, could you sum up briefly, please? So in all these phrases, you're asking people to hurry up in a way, but of course you want to remain polite and make sure that everyone feels heard and like their opinions matter. So next we'll move on to technical problems, which, they can happen and they do happen to everyone. And I think we have become increasingly more tolerant of this because of the times we live in and the way that we work. So, but it's still good to let people know when you are experiencing issues. So when you're checking sound and video, some of the things that you can say are, for example, can I just check everyone can hear me okay? If you want to check everyone is hearing you. Just to check, is the sound okay? If someone is having problems and you want to let them know, you can tell them we can't hear you very well. Often it also happens that the person is on mute. So then you would just say, for example, Ivan, you are on mute. Then it can happen that the sound quality isn't very good. So you could say the sound is distorted or you're breaking up. The picture quality is very poor. Also to check on video, you can say just to check, can you see me okay? Or I just want to check the picture is okay. So these are all things that you can do to check that, the technical aspects are running smoothly. And then also you want to let people know that you're working on it or that they should be patient with you. So one expression that is used very often is bear with me for a moment while I reconnect. Bear with me for a moment while I check what is wrong with my picture. And this expression in English is maybe a bit of a funny one bear with me because it reminds you of the animal, but you're just asking for people to be patient. You can also say, please wait a moment for me to check, or while I check. I apologize for the wait. Please give me a moment to check what's wrong or to solve the problem. And finally, you want to thank people, of course, for being patient and for bearing with you. So next, we're going to move on to how to deal with interruptions. So different things that can interrupt your meeting or what you're saying. So first, how to return to what you were saying. So maybe you were experiencing some technical issues, you got disconnected, you experienced an interruption in real life, which can also happen. So how can you signal to people that you're going back to what you were saying before? So something you can say is, as I was saying, the issue with this is blah, blah, blah. Going back to what I was saying or to what I said before. Let's just go back a bit to what I was saying before. Can I just go back? Okay, where was I? What was I going to say? So this is to signal that, maybe you're not 100% sure or you forgot a little bit about what you were trying to say. So often people will come in, or it can just be a rhetorical question. Okay, what was I saying? Oh, yes, I was saying that. And finally, sorry, where was I? And this one is very common in native speakers when you just use it as a rhetorical question before you start speaking again and resuming what you were saying.
Or maybe you are looking if everyone is paying attention.
Also, you can check if everyone is paying attention. Yes, you can be a bit sneaky that way, but yes. Then when someone interrupts you, so it might happen often when English is not your native language. Maybe you are taking a bit longer to say what you were trying to say. You're slowing down, so people are not sure if you're done speaking or not, or simply sometimes you have people who are very keen to talk, so they interrupt you. So we're going to look at how you can let people know that you haven't finished saying what you were trying to say. So when someone interrupts you, you can say, sorry, just a sec. So let them know that they should wait for you to finish. Okay, I've nearly finished. And then you go on with saying what you were trying to say. Sorry, if I could just finish what I'm saying. Can I just finish what I was saying? It will only take 1 minute. And this one is a bit stronger than the other ones. Maybe you would use it if someone has interrupted you more than once and they are not letting you finish what you're trying to say. So this one is a bit stronger. Sorry, just one more thing. Or sorry, let me finish my thought, and then you can go ahead. So you're signaling to the person that it will be their turn soon. And finally, one moment, please. I'd like to mention another thing before we move on. So this is to let people know that you have something to add to the conversation. And finally, interrupting someone. So it might happen that you want to be the one interrupting. You have something to say. The meeting is moving on, but you still have something to say. So how can you interrupt someone that is talking? Something that is very common that people say is, hold on, can I just jump in here for a second? So this expression, to jump in here, it means you want to make a comment on something. And it's very common. This morning I was even listening to a podcast, a conversation between two people, and they use this exact phrase. So could I just jump in, or hold on, can I just jump in? So this signals to the other person that you want them to wait a sec to stop talking so you can say something. Could I just come in here, or could I just say something? I'd like to comment on that. If I could just interrupt you. I'd like to make a point here if I could. Sorry, could I just interrupt? Or sorry to interrupt, but may I ask a quick question? And finally, sorry, do you mind if I just say something? So if you look at all these phrases, a lot of them have one word in common, and that word is just. So a lot of them have this little word in them. And this word is a way to make it more polite. Yes, it makes it, let's say, smaller. And people use it a lot when they want to request permission to do something, especially interrupt. But just so you know, this word also is not a very assertive word. It makes what you're saying more relative. So if you are trying to be assertive, I would avoid. So I would say, do you mind if I say something? So that is more assertive than saying, do you mind if I just say something? And then finally picking up on what someone said. So maybe you want to go back and talk about a point that someone else made. So you can say, for example, on that subject, I think, or as far as that issue is concerned, I think, with regard to or regarding that issue, I think, or while we're on that subject, I think. So these are all expressions that you can use to pick up on what someone else has said. So next we're going to move on and talk a little bit about how to clarify what you said and also how to ask for clarification. So this is maybe one of the more difficult things to do because you have to show people that you haven't understood. And it may be that you haven't understood because you don't know the words in English, because you find the accent difficult, because you have lost track of the conversation, or maybe you don't understand because people are not expressing their ideas clearly. So these phrases work in all those situations. It's not only about not understanding the words, but also just not understanding what someone is trying to say. So using them is not necessarily bad, and they may come in handy in a variety of situations. So first, how to ask for clarification. So there are a few ways that you can ask for clarification and a few different techniques, let's say. So first, you can ask for clarification by asking the speaker to change their way of speaking. So you would do this if the person isn't speaking very clearly, if they're speaking in a very low voice, if they're speaking too clearly. So you don't necessarily want them to change what they're saying, but how they're saying it. Asking for repetition of the whole phrase. So asking them to repeat what they have said. You can also identify the part that you did not understand and ask for clarification. So this means maybe you understood the first part, but maybe you didn't understand the last part of what the person was saying. So by identifying what section of what the person said, you can ask for clarification on that. Summarizing what the other person has said. Then you can also check your understanding. So, you're not 100% sure that you understood what the person was trying to say, so you can check your understanding. So these are all different ways that you can ask for clarification. So the first one, how to ask the speaker to change their way of speaking. If the person is speaking in a very low volume, you could say, sorry, could you speak up, please? So to speak up means to speak in a higher volume. Sorry, could you speak more slowly, please? Or could you slow down a bit, please? You'll have to speak more slowly, sorry. I don't want to sound rude, but could you speak more clearly, please? So this first part, I don't want to sound rude, maybe you would use it if you have asked the person to speak more clearly and they haven't, or you've repeated yourself a couple of times. So I don't want to sound rude. It means, I don't want to seem impolite, but I really do need you to speak more clearly, more slowly, or to speak up. And finally, sorry, I really need you to speak up. So again, this last phrase you would also use if you've already requested the person speaks up and they don't. So you're reminding them and letting them know again that this is what you need from them in order to understand. Then to ask for repetition of the whole phrase. So you can just ask something like, I'm sorry, what did you say? Could you explain that again using different words? Sorry, could you say that again? Sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you say it again? So this expression, I didn't catch that, it means I didn't understand or I didn't hear that. So these are all phrases that you can use to ask for repetition. So next is identifying the part that you didn't understand and asking for clarification. So this is in a way the most useful way to ask people to clarify because it's more specific. So it will be more targeted to what you didn't understand. So, sorry, what did you say at the beginning? So maybe you understood what the person said at the end, but you didn't catch the first part. I didn't get the middle or the last bit. Sorry, what was the last bit? Could you say the last bit again? Sorry, I missed the part about the problems. And then this one is maybe you understand most of it, but there's a word that you don't know and you feel like you really need to know what this word means. So you can ask, just to clarify, what does X word mean? And finally, if you really don't understand and the person has repeated the word for you, but sometimes pronunciation is hard, it's a really unfamiliar word, you could, as a last resort, ask the person to write that word down in the chat. So could you write that word down? I can't understand it. So this phrase I would use as a last resort and for a word that you really think is critical to your understanding of what is happening. Then another thing you can do is to summarize what another person has said. And what I mean by this is you try to say a short version of what someone else said in order to check your understanding. So, for example, you can say, so what you're saying is that we need to solve the problem right away. Or are you saying that you are not able to deliver this by next week? So you are repeating what the person said in order to check that you understood the right thing. The next one is, so you're saying that you agree, right? So this one you can use in order to clarify really if it's agree or disagree. So you're saying that you can do it, right? So if I understood correctly, you mean, or so if I understood correctly, you think that. Then another thing you can say is, let me see if I get it. You're saying that. Then I'm not sure what you're saying. Do you mean that? Or to summarize, you're saying that, and then you would paraphrase the person's opinion, right? And the last one, if I understand correctly, you're saying that, and then you would paraphrase and check with the person, am I correct? So all of these are a good way of asking for clarification because you are showing that you are paying attention. You're just not 100% clear on what is being said. So next, you can check your understanding. So check that you understood correctly. And for that, you can say something, let me check that you understand. I understand what you mean is, or I'm not sure I understand. Are you saying that? Before you go on, do you mean that? It is still not clear to do. What do I do when this situation arises? And next, I'm not sure that I understand. Are you saying that? And fine, next, sorry, but I am not clear about this topic. So you ask for clarification, or so what you're saying is, and so if I understand you correctly, you mean. And finally, when others don't understand you, and this might happen, it might happen because you are having trouble saying what you want to say. It might happen because your pronunciation isn't very good, or you're getting stuck, or simply, sometimes we don't express our ideas the best way possible, or there are other barriers in communication that have nothing to do with language. So to clarify what you say, you can say something like, what I said or what I meant was, what I'm trying to say is, in other words, what I mean is, the point I'm trying to make is blah, blah, blah. Basically, what I'm saying is, so all these expressions you can use to repeat what you have said before. And our next topic is how to manage the conversation and keep everyone talking. So when you're in a meeting, you want to make sure that everyone is included. And like I said in the session that we had before, these tips or these phrases can be used by anyone in the presentation, but in the meeting, but maybe these ones are more specific to the person that is managing the meeting. So in order to include everyone, there are a few things that you can do. You can make sure that you include quieter individuals. So those people that maybe because they are shy, because they're new to the team, for whatever reason, they haven't spoken up in the team, in the meeting. Then you want to keep louder individuals from monopolizing the conversation. So this is when people have a lot to say, they kind of take over the meeting and they don't allow others to speak. So what to say when someone maybe has spoken too much, or you need others to chip in and bring something to the conversation. Then another thing is you need to sometimes manage different views positively. So what do I mean by this is that, people are sometimes very passionate about their work, or about what they're doing, and you do encounter disagreements in meetings. And you need to manage these disagreements, or you need to manage these different views in a way that no one is going to be offended or feel like their opinion is not taken into account. So we're going to look at tactful ways to let people know that, this topic needs to be tabled and we should move on. And then the last thing is to keep people on track. So this is also something that might happen in meetings, that people go off track. They talk about topics that are not necessarily related to the meeting, or that there isn't enough time to discuss during that meeting. So we're going to look at some phrases that you can use to keep people focused on what you want and what you need in order to keep the meeting effective. So first, how do you include quieter individuals? Of course, what works best always is if you know the people and you know that someone might want to have something to say, to include them and not put people in the spot. So to put someone in the spot, it means to draw attention to them at moments that you know they might feel uncomfortable. So when you're, including quieter individuals, always bear in mind that sometimes people might not want to be included. But if you know that someone has something to say, then you can say something like, Hugo, let me come to you to make sure everyone has the opportunity to speak. What are your thoughts? Or Clara, you haven't commented so far. What's your view on this? Could we just let Esteban finish? So maybe Esteban is getting interrupted very often, so you want to make sure that he finishes what he has to say. And finally, John, I'd like to hear your ideas on this. So these are all things that you can say to bring someone into the conversation. So how to keep louder individuals quiet in a way that is polite and won't make them feel like you don't appreciate their contributions or their ideas. So something that you can say is, that's a great idea or a great question. Hold that thought because I'd like to go back to it in just a moment. So you're asking the person to, hang on to what they want to say and let them know that you do want to hear them at a later point. I appreciate your comments. Let's see what others have to say on that. So you basically stop the person from speaking and invite others to talk. If I could just stop you there, I'd like to hear some other viewpoints. Thanks for contributing your views on this. Now let's hear what others think. And finally, we'll come to you next, Brian. Amy, please continue with what you were saying. So this last one, you would use it if, Brian really feels like he really needs to interrupt Amy, but you want her to finish. So this way you can let Brian know that he will get his turn, but first he needs to let others speak. So how to manage different views and disagreement. Um, in sometimes when you're doing this, you just need to be very clear cut and let the person know that this is not the moment to discuss this topic. So for example, we can discuss this outside the meeting, or can I suggest a compromise on this? And the compromise is when you want people to meet halfway, to meet in the middle. I know that it sounds very similar to the word compromiso in Spanish, but it doesn't mean commitment. It means to, meet in the middle and meet halfway. Why don't we table this issue for now and come back to it later? So this expression, to table an issue, it means to put it on hold, to put it on the shelf, and then later when maybe things are more clear, everyone has had a time to cool down, then you can come back to it. Rather than looking to blame, let's look for solutions. So it might happen that you're in the sort of meeting where something has gone wrong and you need to find out what happened, and conversations can often go to, we need someone to blame, we need to find the person guilty for this, but it's not very constructive to do that. So if you don't want the conversation to go that way, you can say something like this. And finally, I understand you feel strongly about this, but I think we're losing sight of what we are trying to do. So can we move on to something else? And next is how to keep everyone on track. So how to keep everyone on topic. So you can say, we seem to have moved away from the main subject. Let's get back to the topic, shall we? Or we need to move on to make sure we have enough time and meet our goal for this meeting. That's a good point, but we'll need to follow up on it after the meeting. That's a very valuable input, but we need to wrap up this topic. We can follow up after. Can we follow up after the meeting? So to wrap up this topic, it means we need to finish talking about this. That is a very valid point, but we need to focus on an original topic. And unfortunately, we only have 10 minutes left, so we need to move on. And finally, let's table this issue for now. We need to move on. And now moving on to the last topic of our presentation today. So this is something that at the beginning I wasn't sure if I to include it, but I know that I've had in class some conversations with you before where you have asked me how to use language that is, for example, gender neutral, or why people use the pronoun they to refer to one person in English. So I thought we might talk a little bit about inclusive language and why it is important to bring everyone into the conversation and how it is relevant in your work. So first, I'd like to talk a little bit about what inclusive language is. So, inclusive language is the recognition that words matter and that word choice can be used intentionally or unintentionally to include or exclude others. Using inclusive language communicates with people in a way that is respectful and brings everyone to the conversation. So, this is the most important thing about inclusive language, that it brings everyone in and makes sure that no one is left behind or no one is left out. Words are important. They, sorry, have a lot of impact on our interactions. So we want to make sure that our communication is respectful, it's accurate, and it's inclusive of everyone. So, inclusive language aims to avoid words and phrases that exclude people based on their gender, their race, their sexual orientation, their ethnicity, their religion, or their age. And these are just some things, their age and disability. So, these are just some aspects that inclusive language tries to address. And maybe you have heard about a trend in IT and in technology towards inclusive language. So in 2020, the Intel engineer Dan Williams, he is an engineer for Intel and Linux, and he proposed to introduce inclusive terminology in the kernel's official coding style document. So he proposed changing some of the language that was used in documentation in order to be more inclusive. So there has been a trend towards changing some more problematic terms in code, materials, and documentation. And one example is the use of the terms master and slave when describing certain types of software. And as you know, I am not in any way an expert, so I am sorry if I make technical mistakes. But for example, instead of using the term master, you would use the terms source or main. Instead of using the term slave, you can talk about a replica or secondary. And instead of talking about a master slave relationship in software, you could talk about something that is hierarchical. For a more extensive list of what terms are being changed, and bear in mind that this is something that is continuously developing. But if you want to read about more IT inclusive language, you can have a look at this guide by the University of Washington. It's an IT inclusive language guide, and it contains a list of a lot of terms that are considered problematic in IT and alternatives to them. But more relevant to meetings and not so much about, I'm sorry, your code materials or documentation is, for example, the use of gender neutral language. So, gender neutral language is basically avoiding gendered terms and assuming people's gender when you're talking to them. So, an example of this is how we greet people. So, it's very common for people to say, for example, hey guys, hey dude, hey bro, hey man. But if you wanted to switch to more neutral terms, you could say something like hey team, hey everyone, folks, all, y'all, friends, people, colleagues, or audience member. So all these terms are gender neutral and you wouldn't have to worry. Then the next one is good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So instead of saying good morning, ladies and gentlemen, you could say something like good morning, everyone, or good morning, folks. Then we have terms like man hours. So then you could talk about a person hours or hours of effort or work hours. And finally, the term guys, which is very common in English to refer to a group of people, but of course, it only includes one of the gender. So instead of using the term guys, you would use something like folks, people, y'all, or friends. If you want to know more about gender terms, also in the guide that I shared before, you can find some alternatives. And finally, I'd like to discuss pronouns. So pronouns are the words that we use to refer to a person without saying their name. So pronouns in English are he, she for a man or a woman, or they. So I recommend that you use the gender neutral pronouns they, them, and their when you don't know someone's gender or with individuals who are non-binary. So I know that sometimes people indicate maybe in their team status or uh, somewhere in their profile which pronouns they use. So if you see that someone has under their name or next to their name, they, them, their, this signals that these are the pronouns that they want you to use when interacting with them. You might also have seen people who put he, him, his. It's the same. It's used to indicate that these are the pronouns that the person wants you to use when interacting with him. So how do you use the pronoun they, them, or their? So instead of saying something like, if you like the candidate and she, he is interested, we will offer him or her a nice package. This is a very cumbersome way of talking. You could say, if you like the candidate and they are interested, we will offer them a nice package. So instead, even if it's only one person, you would use the pronoun they to refer to a singular individual. I think someone forgot his laptop. Or you can say instead, I think someone forgot their laptop. And finally, who's in charge of the proposal? I'll email him. Instead of saying that, you can say who's in charge of the proposal? I'll email them. So when you use them and their, you're signaling that either you don't know who, if it's a man or a woman, or the person is non-binary. But so yeah, and the next thing, and this one goes a step further, and if it's something that you want to include in the way that you interact with others, you can do it. And I thought, it's not uncommon nowadays, especially like I mentioned with people working in the United States, to ask about pronouns and what pronouns you use. So if you wanted to ask someone what their pronouns are, you could say, how would you like me to address you? What are your pronouns? Also indicating what your pronouns are and then inviting other people to share that with you. So I would say, I'm Lucia. I go by she, her, hers, and you. And finally, something that you could say at the beginning of the meeting could be, for the comfort of everyone in the meeting, please feel free to let me know what pronouns you use and what name you'd like us to refer you by. So above everything, I think, the most important thing is to listen, ask, reflect, and practice. If you encounter someone that uses different pronouns, just try to listen. And if you don't know, always ask and try to be as inclusive as possible, because in the end, this will improve your work relationships. So that is the end for the presentation today. I hope you all found something useful to take away. And I would like to thank you all for joining and yeah, for being in the meeting, in the presentation today. It was a pleasure, and bye bye. Have a nice day, all.
Thank you, Lucia. Thank you
Thank you,
very much for sharing
teacher.
this knowledge. Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
teacher.
Bye bye.
Thank you, teacher.
Bye.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Thank you, teacher.
Bye
Goodbye.
bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Appreciate